Out there in podcast land, welcome to Gray 17, a Babylon 5 podcast. But we are here today to talk about Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 1, The Next Generation. I am Scott, and with me is
Blake?
So Blake and I got very, very lucky, and were able to watch the first 6 episodes of Season 3, and we have been sitting patiently for a week for all of you to start catching up, although it's going to be another 2 months before you guys fully catch up, but we are excited now that we actually can talk spoilers for every episode as they come out. So we're going to be here talking hopefully every week, and I'm trying to dragoon a few more of the Gray 17 folks on as well too if they ever watch the episodes. But right now, Blake and I have seen episodes 1 through 6, and you all hopefully have seen episode 1. So if you have not watched episode 1, this is going to be a spoiler conversation, and you should hit pause, go watch the episode, and then come back to us. But let's go ahead and do as we usually do with Gray 17 and do first impressions. So Blake, what's your first impression of episode 1, The Next Generation?
I mean, my first impression, and you and I have kicked this around, is I'm pissed I have to wait 6 more weeks to, get to see the next episode after we watch that first 6. But my first impression with this, from the very first second that it comes on the screen with that blue title font in the 25th century.
That was my first second. Yes.
Yeah. Is like, this is back to what Star Trek should be, what it can be. This season was going to have a very different tone from just that first bit. And then, I loved having the Jerry Goldsmith theme bits in there. The various pieces, you had the First Contact music, a few other pieces mixed in there. And, just those nostalgia pieces alone made this so much worth watching. But then the visuals of it, the way they're bringing the cast into it, I really, really liked this first episode. I know when you sent it and said, hey, check this out, you're going to like this. And my first question to you was, unless they start off with the very first scroll being, we screwed up, we know we screwed up, we screwed up, and you basically said, yeah, they're going to fix that in the first second. And they absolutely did.
Yeah, Terry Matalas, who is the new showrunner. And for those who don't know who Terry is, and by the way, we've been kind of chatting with Terry on Twitter, so I'm still trying to get him to join us. We actually are going to hopefully have a few guests from season 3, but I will leave that until we can get them on. But there are a few people have already said sure, so we'll be doing that too. But Terry Matalas started working his career as a post-production guy on Deep Space Nine and moved over to Voyager and did quite a few other things in his career. His latest show running was with 12 Monkeys, which I hear is a great series. I haven't watched it. But he did the first and last episode writing for season 2, which happened to be the only 2 really good episodes. And when he started working on this, he said originally, and he's continued to say that for him, he grew up watching the original series movies. Specifically, he has mentioned Star Trek 2, 3, 4, and 6. And you can tell. I mean, as Blake mentioned, the opening crawl is in the 25th century using the Wrath of Khan font. Mm-hmm. And we initially get the Jerry Goldsmith the Star Trek First Contact and Star Trek Insurrection little intro notes. And then we move into I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire by the Ink Spots, which if you're a Fallout 3 fan, you'll enjoy that. But yeah, I mean, right away, it's Terry telling us, guys, it's okay. It's okay. You are now getting, and he has said this too, and I said in our review, you are now getting the undiscovered country movie the Next Generation never got. You are going to get 10 hours of the best Next Generation movie you have ever seen. And Blake and I have seen the first 6 hours, and I feel comfortable saying, at least for the first 6 hours, it is the best Next Generation movie you will ever see. So a couple of things are my first impressions. The visuals are great. The fact that we get some starship love, and we got a little bit of that with the Stargazer in season 2, but I mean, we're in frickin' space dock, and we get to see the Titan A, and she is beautiful. and we get to see an exit from space dock, which again, Terry Matalas loves his Star Trek movies. And just, as you mentioned, Blake, getting the gang back together. You mentioned on our review of the 6 episodes that was not in spoiler, that when we got Riker and Troy in season 1, it felt very, plot wise. It was like, okay, they're on a Borg ship, and now, hey, we're making pizzas with the Rikers. It makes no sense. This makes sense. Initially, we get Beverly Crusher, who, by the way, Gates McFadden has never been able to do this much on screen with a Star Trek show since the Next Generation. She never got this much screen time in any of the movies, and she gets to be a badass. But it makes sense. She reaches out to Picard. He is the only person she can trust, and Blake and I know more reasons of why she is so concerned and why she's running, but we'll get to that in future episodes. And then, who's the only person Picard can trust? Riker. And it just makes sense. It's wonderful. So, first impressions of the episode, I just think it looks beautiful. The writing makes sense. And it really does start feeling like we're going somewhere quickly, as opposed to season 1 and season 2 where it dragged for a long time. This is, we're moving. So, Darren, I'm sorry, Blake, go ahead.
And with the part on the ships, I mean, that was, and I think I'm different from a few people in our group that we've talked with this. I actually did not hate season 1 of Picard. I thought it was a super slow burn. But my biggest issue with it was that last episode where you had that copy and paste Starfleet where, one, the ship was just ugly to begin with, and they just copied this like massive fleet of them with no originality, none of the legacy ships. And starting with the Stargazer last season, this season, and it's not just that they went to the drawing board, they've went into the extended continuity. They're pulling in stuff from Star Trek Online. They've got Drexler designs. They're pulling in the legacy and the expanded universe of Star Trek to fill this out. So the fans are gonna see in here bits and pieces that have been formed over the past several years as they look at these ships and the various pieces they see. And you were right, that space dock scene was absolutely just stunning. And watching that, and it really did throw back to, taking the Enterprise out.
Yeah, and we even have the space dock doors opening and all of that. It's just great. And so in our chat, folks have joined in as well, too. Darren says, Control-C, Control-V, wash, rinse, repeat. That... I was never a huge fan of season 1, and Blake knows this, and part of it was the slow burn, but also just the lack of detail and caring. Also, I don't feel, for the most part, that Picard, who is the title character, was Picard. I think we were watching Patrick Stewart doing what he wanted to do, and I get that, especially in season 2. That was really cathartic for Patrick Stewart to talk about basically his family and making it a Picard show in the process. But this is Picard. I mean, you see so many times in this one episode where he just, like when he's having to be the Admiral and doesn't really want to be the Admiral, but has to play the part, so he goes up and adjusts the one guy's comm badge and kind of does a gruff, that's something Picard would do. And I enjoyed that. It's just... you can tell, unlike in previous seasons, whether you liked it or not, I think everyone can say the production crew did not put as much care into season 1 and season 2 because I don't think they really wanted to. They made a choice that they wanted to tell their story, and they didn't want to have to be tied to the Next Generation or any other Star Trek. And unfortunately, I think that hindered it. So... And some people, and I know, Blake, you want to talk about the reviews, so I'll hold off a little bit, but some people are not happy with all the nostalgia in this, but I think it makes sense, and I think it works. A couple other things in the chat. Darren says, it was such an amazing episode. Mega says, it's a good start in repairing the damage of the previous seasons. I am not sold just yet, but I don't hate it, which is a huge improvement already. Mega, just wait. Just wait. You ain't seen nothing yet. So there's not much that we can still talk about, Blake, because Not much in the way of the plot moves too much in this episode, but a couple things I wanted to chat with you about is one, the Titan itself, and just what we think of this Neo Constitution class Titan A, commanded by Captain Shaw and First Officer Seven, but she will not be called Seven because the captain won't allow it. So, what are your thoughts on the Titan and her crew?
So, yet again, we have another podcast where you and I have to be careful what we say
I
in
know.
regards to spoilers to make sure we stay with what we've got. Uh, keep doing this to ourselves. As far as the Titan, when those early promos came out, I'm going to be honest. The first couple promo shots I saw of it, I'm looking at this thing going, the saucer section is beautiful. I can see, where they're coming from. The Star Drive section, to me, I don't know if it was the angle of it, but it had this boxy angular bit that it's like, I'm not sure I like this. I really don't know. Top half great, bottom half I've got some issues. But once I saw it in the show, the visual of it, I even posted a picture of it on my Facebook page with it leaving space dock because it's just a beautiful ship. The lines work with it. You can tell that they pulled the inspiration. They call it a Neo Constitution class, and you can see those influences into it. You look at the saucer section, the shape of it, the layout of the ship. You can really tell that they pulled from that Constitution class inspiration when they put this thing together. The interior sets actually look good. The bridge is the reuse of the Stargazer from last season. Not the first time that a bridge set has been reused. I mean, how many things was the Enterprise A bridge over the course of Star Trek? But, when they did that, you could tell each time, yeah, there's that bit and piece, but it was something different. They redressed it really well. And that was how this was. The one thing, to go back to season one with the fleet, when you see Riker on the bridge of the ship when he warps in, you're looking at that going, who are you fooling that is the Discovery Bridge? You didn't do a damn thing to this. You put a little bit of extra green screen in the front, and it's the Discovery Bridge from there. This, you can tell it is the Stargazer Bridge, but they redressed it. They reworked it a little bit. It's still got the darker tone with you, and you and I have talked about that. This show still feels a little darker in the lighting and the tone, but as far as the sets go, they're absolutely beautiful, both interior as well as the renderings. And they did quite a few areas of this ship, as we've already seen. You've got the turbo lift, you've got the hallway, and they look good. They actually fit together, fits continuity wise with the look of everything. And then even Crusher's ship, you can tell the design evolution because obviously it's an older ship. You can still see where it fits into design evolution.
Absolutely. And I agree with you on all those points. I was not a fan of the Titan A in the trailer for the very same reason. It looked like a kit bash. It was kind of blocky. But when we start getting some beauty shots of her, and we will get a lot more beauty shots of her moving on down the line, she really does look like, imagine, it's kind of the same thing with the show. You got people who are 40 years in advance, in this case, over 100 years in advance, going back and looking like, hey, nostalgia's okay. And that ship was really pretty. So let's go ahead and bring that design back, but update it to where it is a little bit more compact, like most ships are. I mean, I'm looking at like the Intrepid class and the Sovereign class. So we don't have that big neck, which, as Khan pointed out in Wrath of Khan, it's easy to shoot at. So that makes sense. And the nacelles are obviously much bigger and ample, as Scotty would say, in order to handle a more warp drive. But yeah, it just looks like a beauty ship. It's just it's something that I would love to have added to this collection, and that says a lot. I even have the fat one right here too, which is another thing I loved about this episode. No one wants the fat one.
And that says, Star Trek fans, get ready to hate us. Neither one of us like the Enterprise D. It is the fat one. That shit, I just never liked the Enterprise D. And even the interior of it, the thing with that 80s era, what color do we even want to call that? Beige and mauve, basically. It was like a hotel in space. The thing never
It was the Hilton of the fleet.
Yes.
Okay, don't get me wrong, everybody. I love the Constitution class. I love the 1701 as it was refitted in the movies. But to this day, my favorite Enterprise continues to be the Sovereign class Enterprise E. I just think that is the best looking design. It is a mixture of the new TNG look, along with having the larger nacelles and the pylons for the nacelles that make it look kind of Constitution class like. So I will always be a Sovereign guy, which I'm very sad that we probably won't see the Enterprise E in this episode, but we do see some Sovereign classes in this show. We do see some Sovereign classes. And of course, as everyone knows, because it was in the trailer, it's been on Instagram, it's in the closing credits of every episode, we will get to see the Enterprise F as she is being decommissioned, which we learned a few different ways here over the past week. So we are actually seeing the end of the Enterprise F when she arrives in the show. So Darren says,
and you are wrong, by the way.
What?
You are wrong, by the way. The best looking Enterprise is the Constitution refit.
I love the Constitution refit. She's actually, I have her over here, but she's got a broken stand because Art Asylum stands suck. So I need to get a different one so I can have her up here. So Darren says, my only issue was how many damn impulse engines does a ship need? Well, she's a big ship. She's got to move around. We talked about the ship, but I also do want to hit on the crew, especially in this episode. We get to meet Captain Shaw, and we get to re-meet Lieutenant Commander 7, or Annika Hansen, as she's being told. And I'm not the first one to bring this up, but I love the fact that this is Star Trek making a comment on current day without beating you over the head. And so if you don't know what you're looking for, you probably didn't see it, but they absolutely did reference a term, dead name, when it comes to the trans population. The fact that Shaw refuses to call Seven by her name that she wants, which is Seven. He has to call her Annika Hansen because, for one, he doesn't like the Borg, as we found out in this episode. But two, he does not want her... I don't think he wants her being free to do what she wants to do in that case, as we saw in the dinner scene where Shaw basically shuts her down. So I do like that. And I have to say, I love Captain Shaw. I love to hate the asshole. And we will get much more of Captain Shaw that I can talk about later. But just even this episode, he is the quintessential anti-Picard and Riker, which is what you need. Yeah. You've got Riker and Picard coming in, and then Shaw's just shutting him down left and right.
Well, and the vibe I got with Shaw is watching that scene with the dinner and the commentary he made and just the direction that went. For me, that very much goes back to the same way in Emissary when Sisko met Picard, and that resentment and anger that Sisko held towards Picard due to Wolf 359 and his time as Locutus O'Borg. This very much harkened back to that, and kind of, that wasn't an isolated incident. That wasn't just, Sisko's pissed, but everyone else understands. This kind of gets in there that there's ongoing issues. There's people in Starfleet who remember that and who can't differentiate what he did as a captive versus himself.
Well, and I recognize the reference isn't 100% accurate because Picard does come back and become a captain again and does quite a bit with his career. But imagine how people felt about Benedict Arnold after he was a traitor during the Revolution. To this day, over 200 years later, you don't want to be called a Benedict Arnold. You don't want to be called a Locutus. So, again, we'll get more into Captain Shaw as we get deeper into this, but I also want to just put a big old shout out to the actor Todd Sheswick, I believe is his name. I probably should know his last name. Todd. he is doing a great job here, just being a complete and total jerk. But you know what? The feeling I get off of him is Captain Jellicoe.
Hmm.
From the two-parter where Picard has to do a covert op and gets captured by the Cardassians. And Jellicoe's an asshole. He tells Deanna Troi to put her pants on. He tells everyone we're going to change up the way things are done. He tells Riker he's being too lax on the crew. But at the end of the day, we find out that Jellicoe, even though he's not a Picard, he's not what we're used to, he actually is a good captain. And I hope that at the end of this series, we can say the same about Shaw. So far, based on episode 1, I think we're starting to see that. So again, we don't have much plot yet, but the other thing I do want to hit on, and we have to be careful, because Blake knows.
Well, I was going to circle
Oh, go
one
ahead.
more on the bridge crew because
Please,
we're talking
please.
overall crew of the Titan A, right?
Yes, 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 yes.
You've got the helmsman
Yeah.
who is Ensign LaForge.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
You mean Crash
and
LaForge?
Crash LaForge, and I love the update of that scene because it's almost the scene from Generations again,
Mm.
where you've got Demora Sulu. And, Kirk makes that comment of it wouldn't be an Enterprise without a Sulu at the helm. And you go back to what did LaForge do in the first season of TNG? He wasn't the engineer at that point. He
He was
was
the
the
helmsman.
helmsman.
Yes.
So now you've got Ensign LaForge sitting at the helm of the Titan A. And you've got, Picard and Riker, and Picard like Ensign LaForge, and then Riker goes off and brings up Crash LaForge. But yeah, it just the way they integrated that again, like we commented on, it made sense. It flowed. It wasn't just a throwaway piece.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And we are going to get more of the bridge crew. I mentioned this in our non-spoiler review. I believe that we get to learn more about the Titan bridge crew than most of the bridge crews we've seen in the new Trek. Now, I think, as Blake, as you pointed out, Discovery Season 3 and 4 does a better job of letting us know the Discovery bridge crew, and I think Strange New Worlds is its own thing, and we obviously know that crew pretty well. But aside from that, I think this is the first show to actually, like, make you care about the bridge crew.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna fix what I said earlier. Captain Shaw is played by Todd Stashwick, and also, as you mentioned, Alondra LaForge is. Oh no, that's the other LaForge. I'm sorry. Sydney LaForge is the one we see at the helm, and that is Ashley Sharp Chestnut, who does a great job. And I'm looking forward to seeing more from her. And then, obviously, we know from the trailers and from all the press that there is a second LaForge daughter, played by Burton's actual daughter, Mika Burton, and we will get her later on. Darren says, but notice the difference. Kirk never knew about Demora Sulu, but here Picard knew about her and had met her. Picard was far more invested in his folks' lives. That's true. That is very true.
Yes.
Which is also a reason, and this is where I want to transition to Beverly and to her son, is it kind of a juxtaposition, because Picard has kept track of Riker, Troy, LaForge, other crew members we haven't seen yet, but he lost track of Beverly to a point where he hasn't even spoken to her in 20 years. So when she reaches out to him and asks for help, it's the first time he has talked to her in quite a long time. So I do want to talk about Gates McFadden and her work in here, especially in this first episode where Doctor packs a rifle.
And I still wonder why we need a pump action phaser rifle. That is, I will say I have that curiosity, but this is, Crusher. You're right. Crusher didn't really get a lot to do in the movies. You know,
No.
First Contact, it was okay. Let's get everybody out of sickbay and into the Jeffries tubes. In Insurrection, she was just kind of there, and in Nemesis was what, maybe 5-10 minutes of screen time in all of Nemesis.
Oh man, if that. I mean, she literally was a cameo in that movie.
Yeah. So, this front and center starts off with you've got Crusher, off doing something. We learned in the episode that she basically cut everybody off at some point and had just went off on her own way. And we'll get more into that later on as we go, but you've got that meeting with Picard and Riker's going, do you know why she did this? This just doesn't sound like something she would do. And then just out of the blue calls for this help. But seeing her run around with that phaser rifle like a complete, action hero badass was actually great. I loved it.
And I know Blake and I noticed, but if anyone else is watching, notice how those bird-like aliens disintegrate when they get shot. And I'll just leave it at that. Darren says the pump action is intimidating. The sound, the is intimidating. It scares the crap out of bird aliens, I guess. And then we also have, as we can now...
I thought the laser beams coming out of the end would suffice for that.
Especially when you have Beverly Crusher over you and just blasting the crap out of you as you're laying on the ground. Not exactly the Hippocratic Oath that I know, but also, again, without spoiling what comes next, she has good reason to be blasting the hell out of these guys. Which, moving on, we also have, and we can now call him by his name, Jack Crusher, played by Ed Spieler. And Blake, you had seen him act before, so I'd love to hear what you have to say now that we can talk a little bit about his character.
Yeah, so I've seen him in a few other things, Downton Abbey and a couple other shows that he had been in, and when we watched those first 6 in this episode, and it kind of came out who he was as a character, and I'll admit I got a little worried that is he going to be able to carry this role? Is this something he's going to be able to do? And for the record, he does. He does actually really well in this. And this episode in particular, he carries that almost angry persona that he's setting up in this first episode, that he's just able to pull it off. He does it convincingly, and having the weight of being the character Jack Crusher. I mean, there's implications there, that you've got Crusher with a second son, basically.
Yeah. And I love some of the... sorry, Blake, did you have something else you want to add?
No.
Okay. I love, now that we can actually say he's Jack Crusher, I loved some of the theories that came out over the past, few months as we got that last trailer where he pops up. There have been theories that he was Jack Crusher, the original Jack Crusher's clone. There were theories that he was the villain of the piece, the actual villain. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff too. So I think what actually they have written for him, and I joked about this in comments section on our last review, I'm so glad that fans don't write stories for TV for the most part, because I think the story they've written for him is better than any of the theories I have seen come out so far. But again, we can't say everything we know about Jack yet. But I think, and I agree with you too, he gets a lot to do. And when he does it, again, I go back to whether the character is good, bad, or indifferent. I want to be able to care about what's happening to the character. If I care about what's happening to that character, you've sold me. If I don't care what's happening to that person, then we have a problem. I care about what is going to happen to Jack. Even after watching his first episode, I care about it. And so that's good, especially for introducing a new character. The other character I wanted to hit on is obviously the only other returning character from seasons 1 and 2, and that is Raffi. And Raffi is off on her own. And the one thing I will say, and then I'll toss it over to you, Blake, is I was very concerned going into this season, and based on Raffi's backstory of her character, and we see in the trailer that she is injecting her eye with some drugs, and we see her first looking like she is definitely in need of a hit, and I was like, oh God, I do not want a drug-addled Raffi story for the entire season. I do not need to see her redeemed again. I've seen that already. I don't need to do it again. And I love the fact that they tricked us on this. And
Hmm.
right away in episode 1, she pulls out that TOS communicator and says she's working for Starfleet Intelligence. It's like, oh, thank you. She's a spy. I can deal with spy. I can't deal with drug-addled. Good. Excellent. So what do you think
Yeah.
about Raffi so far?
And I 100% agree with that. And I will say, I think Raffi's story is one of the bright points between season 1 and 2
Mm-hmm.
of Picard, because you mentioned that you get invested in these characters, and she is one of the ones that they actually had that arc, that redemption story where you got invested in her as a character. You've got this person who is on the outs with Starfleet,
Mm-hmm.
lost everything because they think she's this, conspiracy theory crank who gets proven right and has this, redemptive story into season 2. And yeah, when I saw the previews for season 3, and I'm going, we've gone back to season 1, Raffi. We've gone back to this.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna have to go through this again. What the hell? And then yeah, when she and even watching the scenes for that, I was annoyed. Like through that whole part,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
just
I
sitting.
was pissed.
It's like, damn it, we're gonna have to do this again. We're gonna watch this again. We've seen this somewhere along the way, and in my head, I'm kind of building up. There's gonna be this moment of somewhere she's doing something, and it's gonna be, oh son of a bitch, here's John Luke, or here's JL, and he's gonna come in and redeem Raffi yet again. And then yeah, she's walking away and pulls out that communicator, and Starfleet Intelligence is like, okay, thank God, this will work.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know where
And,
it's gonna tie in, but it fine.
and don't get me wrong, folks. I have lost friends and family to addiction. It's not that I, don't care about addiction. It's just, as Blake just said, we have seen that story already with this character. So I want to see this character grow. And I can say, without spoiling, she's going to grow quite a bit.
But the thing I will say, and you see it in this episode too, is you can see the struggle she's having
Yes, absolutely.
with her past versus what she's doing now.
Well, and she even
And,
points
and I
out to
think they
her,
played that very well.
yeah, she absolutely is a recovering addict, which we already knew. And her girlfriend dumped her. So she's got that going for her as well. So, Blake, is there anything else you want to hit on with this episode? Of course, it ends with a cliffhanger. We've got the
Mhm.
weird looking scimitar like ship, and that's not a spoiler. It's not the scimitar, I promise, but the scimitar looking ship bearing down on Picard and Riker over on Beverly's ship, or actually, yes. Aside from that, and the cliffhanger we have, is there anything else you want to talk about with episode 1 before we talk a little bit about Easter eggs?
And I think a lot of what we're going to have is that Easter egg conversation. But
Yeah.
just overall, and we've said this already, but the feeling of this season is so much different.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
and you're right, from the very first few seconds when it kicks off with that in the 25th century and then pans through space, you just feel that it's going to be different. Now, if you're wanting the light, bubbly Star Trek The Next Generation, hotel, love boat, and space type thing, no, it's not going to be that. But again, we're 30 years later, and we'll pick up on that again after some of the Easter eggs. But
Uh-huh, yeah. But to your point, and again, this goes back to what Terry Metalis has said and what we have said. This isn't the Next Generation TV show. This is a movie. And much like when TOS transitioned to the movies, you can argue maybe not the motion picture, but absolutely when Nick Meyer took over with Wrath of Khan, it became a different show because there were more stakes and it was more amped up for the movies. This is the same idea, and this is like if you watched All Good Things, and actually the guys over at Red Letter Media, which I agree with about 10% of the time, but they had a good point here when they were talking about episode 1, is you could watch All Good Things and jump right into this and be okay. And it's just a transition from the TNG TV show to a TNG movie, but it happens to be a good TNG movie as opposed to most of the TNG movies we got. The other thing I wanted to hit on real quick, because we didn't talk about her, is we did get Laris, so another returning character from season 1, season 2. And I really like, even though she gets kind of jettisoned from the story for at least now, on episode 1, I like that the story isn't forgotten that at the end of season 2 they do start a relationship. And I do like the fact that Picard and her are still in that relationship. It's not like she's back to being the maid.
Mhm.
And so I do appreciate that. And it will be interesting, uh, based on, as Picard points out, that he has been in a relationship with Beverly before. It'll be interesting if that dynamic comes up to where Picard is in a relationship with somebody else when he is meeting with Beverly down the line. So that will be an interesting dynamic if and when it comes up. So let's talk Easter eggs. There's a lot. And Blake, I think you wanted to kind of hit on some of the negativity around those Easter eggs first. So go ahead.
Well, it's not so much the negativity on the Easter eggs. I've got more on the comments in general, but some of the early reviews really got into that it was nothing but fluff-filled nostalgia with no point or purpose. Looking at you, Engadget, sorry, but you know, but the pieces fit in. If you're looking in, because one of the things they criticized was Picard and the things he had in his office at his house. you know, I've got stuff behind me from things I've done, Scott. I see things behind you that
Cautious
are
overlooking us.
mementos and keepsakes of various projects and things we've done, so that he would have that picture off the ready room wall of the Enterprise D isn't a stretch.
Mm-mm.
That he has I mean, even after he got it, ever since it was the tapestry on the back of his chair that he was given in TNG, that stayed throughout TNG in the movies, that would be there is not just a, fluff piece. That is part of the character. The Rysican flute is the same way. These pieces fit of someone who has these mementos throughout a career. And even when the communicator chirps off and it's that original uniform and comm badge, which what's funny is they're making fun of that being in the show, but you listen to the interviews with both Frakes and Patrick Stewart, and they talk about they've still got their TNG uniforms. As much as they hated them at times, they've still got them hanging in their closets. So it's not a stretch that the fictional character would have the same. I just don't see where, to me, that's more of a, we don't want to like this, so we're going to find a reason to hate it.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And they even talk about it. Picard talks about it. He's gone through a phase in his life where he's looking backwards, and now he is actually again with his new partner. He's looking forward again, and we all go through that. We all go through those times where we look backwards and we wonder, okay, I mean, Blake and I are close to middle age at this point, God forbid, but we look back and like, okay, what was the best days behind us, or are they in front of us? And I also do like the fact that a lot of what was on his desk this time, as opposed to previous seasons, were there for a reason. Everything on that desk harkens back to a part of his experience, which again you mentioned. Even talking about, but a good example, what I was just saying, where he's looking towards the future now, is he's going to give away the painting of his favorite command to Geordi because he's ready to move on. And that's an interesting place to see Picard in, that he is ready to make another part of his life happen. And I think that is going to be a main theme, and I can say this because, again, I've seen more, but one of the main themes of this season is going to be the legacies we leave and the legacies we have yet to make. And I like that this first couple scenes do that. I appreciate that.
Well, and even the same argument applies to when you look at that opening scene through Crusher's ship. And we've already mentioned it's an older ship, so it has that TNG era desktop computer terminal.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's also got the pieces where it has that crate of Jack Crusher's items. That's something she's going to have.
Yeah.
She had that in Next Generation. That's something that she would hold on to have that case of, a lost spouse's or a lost partner's belongings. I just don't see where that's out of place. And then, the terminal I mentioned, it was reading off the logs from around the time of Best of Both Worlds, which this episode explains why that wasn't a lost piece. There's a reason that log was pulled up.
Yeah, she was trying to find a way to tell Picard what was happening without telling anyone else. And
Yeah.
again, we don't know exactly why yet she is having to be so covert in what she's doing, but it's only episode 1. So I think we can rest assured we will find out more of that. But yeah, I agree with you to that same aspect that everything in here, yes, there's a lot of nostalgia. There's a lot of, hey, old fans, remember this? But it's there for a reason. And that is because you have a showrunner and you have a writer's room that cares enough to say, look, I want to do something that I love and I want to show love to something I care about, but also I want to move the story forward. And I really do appreciate it. The other thing I love is actually the same thing that Picard has done in both season 1 and season 2, the show. And that is, it was actually the opening credits in season 1 and season 2. But the closing credits in season 3, if you were an eagle-eyed observer, there is a lot of stuff in there, and I'm not going to point out all of it because, again, I don't want to spoil what comes next. But if you watch it, there's a lot of interesting stuff in that in-credits sequence that foreshadows what's going to happen or what could happen down the road, and I really do appreciate that. And there's already been a lot of other shows on YouTube have picked off every little piece of that. But a couple of things that I really did appreciate was the views of some of the ships in that closing credits. We get a Klingon bird of prey. We get some of the previous Enterprises. We get the Voyager. We get a few other references to other ships that I will, and also this is also where we see that the Enterprise F is due to be decommissioned. So the Enterprise F after an experience in a mission that I forgot the name of, they're due to be decommissioned. So it must have got really pummeled or something. And then actually I will reference Trek Culture because they're the ones who caught this for me. Is there's also some musical notes in the closing credits, and they actually played the musical notes on their video. And I just assumed, because I'm not a musical guy and I can't read music, I just assume it was music from like the TNG theme or anything. But it is Pop Goes the Weasel. And if you know anything about the Next Generation, Pop Goes the Weasel is quite important to several of the characters in TNG from season 1. So that's the kind of stuff that I just appreciate. It doesn't have to beat you over the head, but it's there. It's there.
Well, the other thing, even as a slight Easter egg, is looking at, and we go back to the discussion around the ships, the Ilios, which was Crusher's ship. It even had, it harkens back almost in a way you think of the Equinox from Voyager, and you think of even that Voyager era design with the consoles. It's just those little design callbacks. And I believe they had Mike Okuda back involved in this too.
They did. Yep, he was in the season as well.
It's got those callbacks to even the consoles and the way they work.
I'm glad you brought the Helios again, because the one thing I forgot to mention, and again, this is another thing I saw from Trek Culture when I watched their video, is the scaling is interesting. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was Red Letter Media. It's one of the two. I've watched both videos. The scaling is interesting because you can definitely see how small that ship is, because that shuttlecraft, which is not a large shuttlecraft, it's not a runabout, it's a very small shuttlecraft, is literally the size of the bridge when it docks. It's about the same size. So you can imagine that this is Crusher's personal ship, and she's not going to have a crew. And as we see, she's got her son and her, and they're, so I mean, even though it's like a Federation design, it is extremely small, and that makes sense. If she's going to have her own ship, she's not going to go out and, get a Excelsior class starship. She's going to get a little thing that she can toy around with and also afford. Anything else in the Easter eggs?
So a couple other Easter eggs, when Picard and Riker get on the ship, they had the boatswain whistle.
Yes.
That harkens back to when Kirk showed up for the inspection of the Enterprise. They had that whistle sound that they played for the welcome aboard. piece for that. That was another nice little throwback.
It's also telling that Captain Shaw is not there to greet the admiral and the
Yes.
captain.
Even looking at the outfits, looking at Crusher's jacket, we've seen similar to that before as kind of a civilian wear jacket
Mm-hmm.
with that piping and stuff
Oh,
on it.
it's absolutely harkening back to the away team jacket
Yeah,
from Wrath of Khan.
yeah, it's the Monster Maroon away team jacket, and it
Mm-hmm.
absolutely,
Yeah.
fits in with that. The other part is, I think this is the first time since really Undiscovered Country plus the Voyager flashback episode we saw quarters on a starship that weren't, individual private quarters. They put Riker and Picard in the bunk beds, in the rack 'em
Again,
and stack 'em bunk beds.
Captain Shaw, I have been called an asshole many a times in my life, so I feel endeared to Captain Shaw. And you know what? If somebody showed up on my ship who I really didn't want to be there, and I wanted to tell him just how much I didn't want to be there, I'd stick him in bunk beds too. I'd be okay with that.
So
Uh,
yeah, but seeing that little part is the throwback in there too. Was just kind of nice to see those other areas of the ship as they popped in.
yeah, yeah, agreed. Janice in the chat says, I'm concerned that they have so many callbacks that they haven't paid enough attention to crafting a good overall story. Janice, we can't tell you much of anything else, but if you haven't heard yet, because I know you just popped in, Blake and I have seen the first 6 episodes of season 3. It's okay. I promise you, they have crafted a story that not only is good, but it makes sense.
Yeah, and we've said this a couple times, Janice, and there is all these callbacks, but the callbacks actually contribute to the
Yes.
story. They're not just meaningless,
Mm-hmm.
having it sitting on a shelf for the sake of being on a shelf. Everything is meticulously put into this for a reason.
And that continues, at least through the 6 episodes we've seen. Every time there is as people like to use the South Park reference, the member berries. Every time there's a member berry, it's not just that. It is a plot point, which also means you should be watching out for these too. When stuff comes back that is a callback, it is a plot point nearly every single time. And now that I've watched episode 1 about 3 times, including the one time I watched before it came out, there's some stuff in there that I didn't catch the first time either. So it is definitely, they are being smart about it. And I don't want to point out what that stuff is because it may spoil stuff for what comes next. So, Blake, we really can't do, with our Babylon 5 podcast, we usually have our newbies do predictions. We really can't do predictions yet. We can't, but you can. So those in the chat and those in the comments below who are watching us after we are live, tell us your predictions. Where do you see Picard season 3 going? And then Blake and I will zip our lips and just smile and pretend not to know what's going on, much as what we do with our newbies on our Babylon 5 podcast. So the first one we have, go ahead.
Well, we get some chat comments in. And one thing just to circle back to also, reading some of the other reviews criticizes that these are not the characters that we knew in TNG or in the movies. And TNG went off the air in 94. That's almost 30 years ago that TNG went off the air.
I was sitting on my parents' floor in front of the TV, and it was a marathon night. They showed the top 10 episodes of TNG, and then they showed All Good Things. Maybe it was top 5. But I remember seeing Relics, and I see Best of Both Worlds, and then All Good Things. So I remember the finale well. I was there.
And then, Nemesis came out in 2002, so Nemesis 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Scott, you and I have known each other for almost 20 years, if not more at this point. Yeah, I know. It's been a couple decades. But neither one of us are who we were 20 years ago.
True.
And to sit there and complain that these characters aren't who they were 20 years ago, I think that's one of the parts of this show. And, one of my biggest criticisms of Voyager is in 7 years, we didn't see character development. We didn't see character growth.
Poor Harry
The
Kim.
one thing I will say with these characters is we saw that development and growth through TNG, through the movies, even though there were some steps back with a few characters like Crusher. but we've seen these characters grow into this season as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get to see more of, where they've been over this last 20 years, but these characters are in a different place. Just like our generation, we've been, over the last 20 years, look at everything we've had. We've had what? A couple global financial meltdowns, a global pandemic. There's been, civil unrest with political issues. These things have all changed over the last 20 years and impacted who we are and the way we think about things now.
Mm-hmm.
And the same is true of these characters. And the writing in this series says these are the characters you knew, but they have aged another 20 years. They have lived another 20 years. They didn't just go into stasis and pause everything from when we've seen them last to where they are now.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see how people take some of the characters as we meet them along the way. We've obviously seen Riker already, and even Riker, I mean, we saw him as the happy family man in season 1 who had lost a son but had a daughter and was still very close to Deanna. But as we get a little rumblings here in episode 1, all is not well in the Troy household. And so again, that's but I will say I love the fact that Jonathan Frakes in this show, especially to starting out episode 1, he's having fun with the role. I remember one of Terry Metalis' things he said was because Jonathan Frakes directs a lot of Star Trek. He's directed Discovery, Picard season 1 and 2. He will be directing the Strange New Worlds Lower Decks crossover that's coming, so forth and so on. So Terry Metalis went to Frakes during the filming of season 2 and said, "Hey, here's my idea for season 3." And from what Terry says, Frakes turned to him and said, "You actually want me to act?" ? And we get to have him act, and every crew member from TNG gets some time to shine, I will say that, and we still haven't seen all of them. But there are some characters, without spoiling anything, where they are, to Blake's point, may not be where you had hoped those characters would go. And it'll be interesting to see how the audience reacts to that and how our other characters react to that when they run into them. I'm thinking of one in particular, and I'm fairly sure, Blake, you know who I'm talking about. But when we see that character, that person is reluctant to be a part of the story. And it's interesting to find that person there, where they're at. But there's a reason for it. And
there's a reason.
And we'll talk about when we talk about it. But there's a reason for it, and I like the reason. So,
which I will say, I did love, because, we all loved in TNG when Picard looked at Crusher and said, "Shut up, Wesley." But this episode, I loved it when he looked over at Riker. "Shut it, Will."
Yes.
I loved that moment.
And I will say, again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but we get some really interesting dynamics with Riker and Picard, because when we left Riker and Picard in Nemesis, they shook hands and Riker went off to make his own command, and Picard stayed behind on the Enterprise. So now we are dealing with, yes, Picard's an admiral, but much like Kirk, he was never meant to be an admiral. He's a captain. We have 2 captains. Actually 3 with Shaw. We have 3 captains on the Titan right now. And when you have 3 alpha people in charge at the same time, things happen. So it'll be fun to watch that dynamic as it builds out too. So we did get one prediction. And again, Blake and I are going to put our poker faces on. Darren says, "I want the crew to have to steal the Enterprise A from the museum. I'd pay cash to see it." Okay, Darren, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And again, if you're watching not live, you can put your predictions in the comments below. I would love to see them. I've seen so many predictions. One is around the villain that we know is coming. We haven't seen her yet, but if you've watched the trailers, you know she's coming. So many predictions around that person, including she is Celia's daughter or granddaughter. She is the great-granddaughter of Khan. There's a whole lot of stuff out there. I'm looking forward to seeing what the audience thinks when the origin of that person gets revealed. It's going to be interesting. So, Blake, is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap this sucker up?
I think we covered just about all of it that we can actually talk about at this point.
I don't even know if the second episode's title is out in the wilderness yet, so I won't say what episode comes next because I don't know if I'm allowed to. But I will say it's a fun one, and we also get to learn a lot more about actually what's going on in this world right now. So I'm looking forward to talking about episode 2 with you, Blake, next week. So until then, we are usually the Gray 17 Babylon 5 podcast, and you can find our shows here on YouTube, or you can also find the podcast version by clicking the links below, anchor.fm/Gray 17 podcast. We are active on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, here on YouTube. So please join our social media communities. We have a great group of folks. There was just, in the past few hours, there's been a couple of different posts from our fans on Facebook about really deep diving into Babylon 5 episodes, which has been really fun. And then also, as I did mention, fingers crossed, we have some leads and some interest from folks who are actually a part of Picard Season 3. So I hope we'll have some special guests on as we continue to talk about these episodes. So until... Oh, go ahead, Blake.
I was going to have one last piece. And, we've now seen the first episode. Everybody has seen the first episode. The one thing you and I can say is you and I binged this for 6 hours straight. And we even said at no point were we sitting there going, God, is this over yet? I'm going to be curious to see as this kind of picks up with those who are watching it week to week, how that reaction is going to be when they hit these cliffhangers and, we're going that week to week. I mean, you and I are frustrated. We're having to wait 6 weeks for episode 7. So I'm just going to be curious to see how that picks up with people as they're watching week to week.
Yeah, that's very true. I muted myself. That's very true. And the one Janice says I missed her prediction. Janice, I talked about the one where you said you're concerned, and I said don't be. What other prediction did I miss? Put it back in the chat so I don't miss it. While Janice is typing, the other thing I will say. The one who Jack's father really is. Janice, I didn't see that. You put it again, because I don't have that in the chat. Maybe you put it in the comments and not the chat. So Janice, stick that sucker back in there. She says the one about who Jack's father really is. Okay. Who do you think Jack's father really is? What I was going to say while Janice is typing again is another thing I said during the review, and we don't really get it in episode 1, but what I love about this show and what I'm looking forward to the audience seeing as we get forward is no matter what fandom you attest to when it comes to the original Star Trek, if you are an original series fan, there is stuff in this show for you. If you are a fan of the movies, there is stuff in this show for you. If you're a TNG fan, obviously. If you are a fan of Voyager and Deep Space Nine, there is stuff in this show for you. And even if you're a fan of Enterprise, which I do enjoy my season 3s and 4s of Enterprise, there is some stuff in this show for you. But again, to Blake's point, it's not just in there to be in there. There are reasons that they are in there. Janice, I'm waiting for you. I'm waiting. Dead air, Janice. Hurry up. Well, hopefully Janice will get back in there. But I will go ahead and wrap it up while we are waiting for her. And again, say that hopefully you will check out our other shows. We are, again, the Gray 17, a Babylon 5 podcast. But Blake and I's first true sci-fi loves were Star Trek. So the opportunity to see this show as it comes together, and also the fact that it's actually good, really caused us to decide to go ahead and do this on the side as a project. And hopefully you all enjoy it. And hopefully we get some new fans to join us as well through this process. But it looks like Janice is not going to send me her message. Sorry, Janice. You can put in the comments and we will respond. I'm going to guess I know what your prediction is, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. So until next week when we find out what happens. Okay, and Darren says he's loving the B5 podcast. I got excited. Something to put in the chat. Until we find out what's next for the crew of the Titan A and the Helios, I have been Scott, and with me has been
Blake.
And we will see you. No, hold on. That is why Janice, now Janice said that is why she disappeared for 20 years. I still don't have your original prediction. You are giving me reasons for your prediction, but I don't have your prediction. Okay, there it is. I predict that this is from Janice. I predict that Jack isn't Picard's son, but Jack Crusher's son. She has harvested the DNA from her dead husband. Well, we will find out, Janice. And thank you for putting that in. I'm glad we got it in before the show ended. So, as I was saying, until next week when we talk about Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 2, or until you catch us on our Babylon 5 podcast, where on Wednesday we'll be discussing Gropos, one of Blake's favorite episodes, we will chat with you soon. Thanks, everybody.